Hello everyone, thanks for tuning into this morning's video. We're going to have a look at the weather going through next week. This morning it looks like we're going to be seeing a bit of a change next week as low pressure starts to try and push in off the Atlantic, starts to break down the prolonged dry spell that we've had setting up for the last few days. Now that low pressure could bring us some quite warm southerly winds, but we've also got some very cold air sitting just to the east and the northeast of the country, and that cold air may start to move our way as we move through next week, and it could interact with that low pressure system. And we can't really say what's going to happen next week, I don't think, at the moment. Might get heavy rain and quite mild temperatures, but there is the risk if that cold air gets in enough that we might get some snow. Now, I'll explain exactly what's going on in a moment. Before I get on with the video, just want to mention the advertising about usually be a video ad overlay my weather videos at GavsWeatherVids.com. Please play those videos, you'll be supporting GavsWeatherVids.com by doing that. So we're starting off with the GFS ensembles. These are for the upper atmosphere, but they're useful for lower down. We've got temperature ensembles here, the lines here indicating temperature in the upper atmosphere, the spikes on the bottom indicating precipitation. So we can see that for the next period, the next week really, we're going to be very dry. There's not going to be much precipitation going on at all in the next week from around the 26th through to around the 5th of March. Very dry period coming up. Then notice from around the 6th or 7th of March, suddenly these precipitation spikes start to increase, and we get a lot of precipitation spikes then as we move from around the 8th, 9th of March through to the end of the ensemble. That's indicating that trough of low pressure setting up in the Atlantic and starting to push weather systems in, bringing outbreaks of rain, potentially wintry outbreaks as well across the country. But temperature ensembles show that in the upper atmosphere, we're actually going to be a little bit above average in the next few days. You won't feel it down on the ground because you're going to be stuck under a lot of leaden skies really, but if you get sunshine it'll feel quite pleasant. But temperature's really a little bit above where it should be. The red line is actually where the temperature should be at this time of year, so most of members of the ensemble are going for slightly above average temperature in the upper atmosphere. I have to emphasise that, in the upper atmosphere in the next few days, but it won't be particularly above average down on the surface. But then notice from around the 5th, the 6th, we start to get this split occurring in the temperature ensemble. Some members of the ensemble start to go quite cold, whereas most of the members stay quite mild. And that's really the split that I was talking about, the uncertainty that I was talking about for next week. But we might get a mild southerly push with the low pressure. We might start to bring in some colder air from the east. So this is the generic chart from the GFS model for Monday. Still got the high pressure there on Monday the 4th over the country, really keeping it largely settled. A lot of cold air pulling up over Scandinavia, notice, and this is the big area of low pressure in the mid-Atlantic that could start to move towards us. Probably almost certainly will start to move towards us actually as we go through next week. So this is the chart for Tuesday. The high pressure is beginning to break down. That low pressure in the Atlantic starting to get ever closer. Notice pressure is beginning to go up over Greenland a little bit as well. Cold air is pulling up there over Scandinavia, and as we move through into Wednesday, we actually start to pick up an easterly wind then, with this low pressure digging in through the Atlantic, starting to try and push weather systems up. And as this easterly wind begins to develop, it might start to bring in colder air from the east across the country. Then as we move through into Thursday and Friday, we really have got a battle taking place. Now this is 10 days away. We've got this deep area of low pressure out in the Atlantic. We've got the cold air coming in from the east. So we've got a generally southerly to southeasterly wind. Actually we're trying to throw up mild air from the Atlantic with that southerly wind, but the cold air is trying to dig in from the east. So this is a real battleground type situation. Quite what will happen with this, I'm not entirely certain. Will probably turn more and more unsettled next week, but whether that cold air gets in enough to start to turn that rain to snow, I'm not sure. The GFS is very uncertain about it, as is the ECMWF. Here is the ECMWF again, that big trough of low pressure there in the Atlantic through on to Monday, but we're still under the ridge actually on Monday, and as we run through next week, that low pressure increasingly starts to dig in towards Iberia. We start to pick up this southerly to southeasterly flow here across the country around the northern and eastern side of this low pressure system. And as we move through into Thursday and then into Friday, well, again, it's still a battleground type situation. The trough of low pressure is in the Atlantic, a deep trough, that 975 millibars in the Atlantic, very deep area of low pressure, but the cold air is still there up to the northeast trying to dig in. This is actually quite a mildish sort of pattern really from the ECMWF, and increasingly unsettled, but the cold air, it just isn't far away, and very slight adjustments would allow that cold air to dig in from Scandinavia. The GEM again showing that we're under the ridge of high pressure through to Monday. So through to Monday, I think we are looking at a largely settled spell of weather continuing with mainly dry conditions across most of the country. But then things start to show signs of breaking down as we go into the middle of next week. We've got this deep trough of low pressure here in the mid-Atlantic, picking up this east to southeasterly flow across the country around the northern side of that low pressure. That isn't particularly cold because the air is actually originating from the Mediterranean. The cold air is all up here over Scandinavia. But as I say, very slight adjustments would allow this cold air to start to push in, and you would really be looking to see this low pressure move through Spain in towards the central Mediterranean. Then you'd start to open the floodgates to that easterly or northeasterly flow. And actually it does happen a little bit for Scotland. On the GEM, we do start to bring in that cold air to Scotland and northern England, I think, once we get through to the end of next week, but the low pressure is still keeping winds generally originating from a southerly direction for England and Wales, and it will be turning very unsettled if that's right. So it's a very uncertain pattern as we go through next week. I think we will find the high pressure increasingly breaking down through next week. Low pressure trying to throw weather systems up across the country could turn it very unsettled as we run through next week, particularly later next week, could turn really quite wet. And we've got to watch out for that cold air over Scandinavia. Very slight adjustments would allow that cold air to start to undercut the low pressure and possibly deliver us some wintry weather. So certainly interesting patterns emerging as we move through into March. Come back tomorrow, it's a 5-day forecast. That's it for now. Thanks for watching.